poker's legendary champions, next generation stars, and tireless ambassadors of the game, sharing their wisdom and guiding your journey to high achievement on the green felt. This is Chasing Poker Greatness with your host, Brad Wilson.
What is up, my friend, and welcome back to another episode of Chasing Poker Greatness. This is your host, founder of EnhanceYourEdge.com, Brad Wilson, and today I'm going to be talking with co-founder, publisher, and business operations manager of Ante Up Magazine, Scott Long. Scott and his partner, Chris, worked together at the St. Petersburg Times, which is Florida's largest newspaper publication. In 2008, when they were told a project they were both passionate about wasn't going to get the funding they thought it deserved, they decided to quit their good-paying jobs and risk it all by going out on their own. Shortly after, Ante Up Magazine was born, and they haven't looked back since. Ante Up is a unique poker magazine aimed squarely at the recreational player. Rather than just covering the big tournaments and pros, Ante Up gives recreational players real and relevant information about the games they play. From getting more out of weekend home games to finding the best places for organized amateur games, Ante Up caters to the vast majority of poker players who aren't professionals. Over the years, Ante Up has spawned several other features and events that have taken things farther than Scott ever thought he would go. Ante Up publishes a weekly podcast hosted by Scott and Chris, runs regular poker cruises, and even hosts their own poker tour. Scott has proven to be one of the most influential poker ambassadors in the industry. His views from inside and outside the game, and especially within the recreational player community, give him great insights into the game, how it's played, and the real people who play it. As we talk today, Scott will share how and why he and his partner decided to create Ante Up, what it was like in the beginning, and why they're still around when so much of their competition has disappeared. He talks about the dangers of making too many assumptions and how he deals with failures. You'll also hear what he values the most and what to him embodies poker greatness. He'll speak on the importance of adapting as you grow, why they call him the short stack ninja, and the concept of card destiny. So without any further ado, I bring to you my conversation with Scott Long. Scott, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you, Brad?
I'm doing very well, full of energy, ready to get this show on the road, have a lot of questions after, doing my research and just things that I want to know. And I feel like my audience wants to know as well, or at least I hope. If not, they just tuned out. So before starting Ante Up Magazine, you had a long and distinguished career in journalism, but still creating a poker magazine seems like a very daunting challenge. Let's kick things off by you telling us your why behind creating Ante Up Magazine.
Yeah, sure. It's actually kind of a story that most people told me they found pretty interesting. My business partner, Chris Cosenza, and I were editors at the what was then called the St. Petersburg Times, a newspaper here in Florida. In 2005, more than 14 years ago, we're so old, the newspaper hired an intern who was very tech savvy and encouraged the newspaper to start exploring podcasting. Now, these days, everybody knows what a podcast is. Almost everybody has their own podcast, but 14 years ago, it was a pretty brand new thing. So we were kind of on the cutting edge of that. So Chris volunteered us to do a poker podcast. And within the first month or so of some really, really horrible episodes, we ended up getting emails from folks around the world. And we're like, wow, this is pretty cool. And then kept at it for a while and really turned the show into something pretty good, we think. Segments, guests, we got our act together. And 3 years later, we went to our bosses and said, hey, we think there's something here. Why don't you just put some more resources in it? And they're like, no, we need to focus on the newspaper. So we quit. Couldn't make enough money, obviously, off the podcast. But what we did notice was that at the time, none of the poker magazines out there were covering Florida poker. And we had probably 30-some poker rooms back then. And the reason they weren't covering it was because of our really, really horrible laws here at Corning Poker. you could only, the max bet in poker back then was $2. So if you can imagine what the games were like back then. So
I remember those days. I think the very first time I played live poker was at the Daytona racetrack. It was $2, $2 poker on every street.
Yeah. Crazy.
Going back to that conversation with your boss, how were you feeling? What were you thinking when he told you that he wasn't going to invest the resources that you asked for?
Yeah, I think we knew that was probably a possibility. Obviously, we were disappointed. At that point, I was able to see the writing on the wall. I knew the newspaper industry was close to falling off a cliff, and that they needed to kind of reinvent themselves with new technology. And I thought this was a good way of doing it. But it's also a very traditional newspaper there, so I knew that they're not big on taking chances.
Sure.
So wasn't surprised. But at that point, we were so amped up, and we knew we had something here. That's when we knew we had to figure something out. So that's started doing our research and thought the magazine would make sense covering Florida poker, and it turned out it did. It was hard at the beginning, but turned out it did. So
I'm sure it's very difficult in the beginning, as pretty much everything is, I think. Were either of y'all married at the time?
Both, yeah.
What'd your wives think about?
Yeah, those were tough conversations to have. I can't speak to Chris's conversation with his wife. I don't really remember how that went now, but I can guess. But I definitely remember how mine went with my wife. My wife is very smart, very intelligent, probably a little less of a dreamer than I am. But she's the one that kind of brings me back down to earth when I need to be brought down to earth. And she had a lot of really, really, really good questions that day, and made me and Chris go back and kind of really do a little bit more research, dig around, make sure that we had the answers that she was comfortable with, and ultimately she was. So I would certainly appreciate having supportive wives. I don't think you can do this without it. Part of me is envious of people that make these decisions younger in life when they're not attached, that no spouses, no kids, no bills really, and that it's a much easier challenge. But when you've been married 15 some years or however long it'd been at that point, and had a mortgage and all that kind of stuff, to quit a decent paying job and start a somewhat crazy idea, you need that support at home. So we're very happy that both of our wives ultimately were supportive of it.
How long did it take y'all to replace that income with Ante Up Magazine?
Oh, wow. I would say it was probably a good year and a half before we took our first real paycheck. Obviously,
that's got to be a tough year.
Yeah, we were taking some money out. We were able to take some money out to kind of pay back what we invested in the company, but an actual paycheck was probably a good year and a half. So again, I mean, it's helpful to have that support at home. We had to lean on both the spouses at that time and savings, and had to dial back our spending and fun and all that kind of stuff.
Yes,
that was made a little easier by the amount of time that we had to put in to get the business going. I'm like, I think back to those days, and I don't remember how I even had time to go out for dinner back then. So that helped a little bit. We weren't spending as much, but yeah, it was lean. No lying.
Any time y'all wanted to quit, give up the dream?
No, I don't think we ever wanted to quit. I think anytime you do an endeavor like this, no matter how much research you put in and time, and I think we did a lot of research and asked all the right questions and had what we thought a good plan. But once we started, we realized a lot of the research we did was based on bad information. So
what do you mean by that?
Just things that we did the calculations on revenue, but then we found out that I'll give you a simple one. No one pays rack rates for advertising. We didn't know that. We just we assume you go to Walmart and you want to buy a tube of toothpaste and it says $3 on it. You walk up and you pay $3 for it, right?
Exactly.
It's different in the media world. The media world, there's a lot of negotiations and deals and things like that. So a lot of our projections were based on rates that were ultimately proved not to be reliable,
not non-existent. So basically, what you're saying is that for me as an entrepreneur, never go to somebody and just pay the rate. So always enter into a negotiation.
I wouldn't say that. I would always say ask, negotiate a little bit. Once we've gotten established, then we've been able to be a little more firm in our pricing. But when you're starting out and you're new, people want to take a chance on you, and it did take us a while for us to realize that I hate to say swallow your pride, because that's a little more dramatic than it is, but to understand that you got to get somewhere before you can start being picky and choosy. And I'm on the entrepreneurship advisory board for my alma mater, and so one of the things I tell the students there and other people is that one of the biggest things you're going to learn in business is that no one, not even your mom, is going to love your product as much as you do. So once you get past that, and you're able to understand that and accept it, then you're able to make some of the decisions with your business that you need to get it off the ground.
And as far as brand ambassadors, you're the man, right? You're the guy. You got to talk about it. I think that's a mistake that I see a lot of people make, is like they're shy or bashful about their thing, but nobody will love your thing as much as you do.
Right.
That's just the facts of life.
Yeah. So it's two things. I mean, one, you have to have that passion. I mean, if you're right, you can't sell your product if you don't believe in it and you're not, making it sound great. At the same time, like I said, you also have to be realistic about what people's reaction to it is. One of the tougher things for us, I think, is that there are a lot of scenarios where we know our product can really help a poker room or a casino, and our product, more than other ones they're using, can help it. But so, and if we don't get that sale, then it's frustrating, because we feel like we don't understand why that is. But there's so many reasons and decisions that go into how people spend their money and everything, right? So it's not always based on what's logical. So.
And it's a good feeling, though, I would say, to be so passionate about your product, to know that it can help a business, and be disappointed when you miss a sale, right? You're not, you're not sleazy, you're not scammy. It's going to add value, and you're genuinely disappointed because you missed a sale, and that it could have been a mutually beneficial relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel a little bit of that in my own life. I'm learning, and growing in my own poker experience and entrepreneurial experience. So, year and a half in, before you get a paycheck and you can replace your income, what was the breakthrough?
Wow, that's a good question. I think it was just, it has to build. I don't think there was like one big. It wasn't like we signed one big, huge client at that point that made all the difference. I think it was just a slow build. I think that's kind of the other thing that I think people kind of lose track of when the review of entrepreneurship is watching Shark Tank. You don't always get that big sale, that big investor that makes it work. Sometimes it's just grinding every day.
Were y'all self-funded?
Yes. Yeah. We both were the only two investors ever. So in fact, actually, we made a pretty conscious decision that we didn't want to seek out investors. Even as we grew, we had people casually mention that they might be interested in doing that. But we made a pretty conscious decision that we'd worked for other people our entire lives, and we're kind of happy now. The only people we're working for are being our clients. So, and as soon as you take that money from someone as an investment, or now you're working for them again. So, and you lose that complete control over your product and your company. And I think what's interesting about that, there were some companies that started at the same time we did. Some that have spectacularly flamed out. Some that went on and
Bluff Magazine.
Some that got gobbled up by bigger people, and they people start them are having a great life now, and we're somewhere in between. And I'm quite happy being somewhere in between, versus flipping a coin on one of those other two options. Sure, it'd be nice that if somebody came in and gobbled us up and we're living in a big mansion now, still doing this, but the risk in it being the other way, and having to go back in the workforce and start all over, I'd much rather that we did the slow and steady wins the race model. So I think that was what it was. It wasn't a big breakthrough. It just took that long to build up the name and the brand and the business.
As they say, humans often greatly overestimate what they can get accomplished in a year, and greatly underestimate what they can get accomplished in 10.
Very, very true. Absolutely. I just, even today, I'm 47 now, and we started this thing back when I was 36. And, I wake up every day and I'm like, yeah, it's September 17th. It seems like I was just, trying to get a project done in time for St. Patrick's Day. Like it's September already. So things move quickly. Time moves quickly. Those 24 hours a day, I don't think they drag on anymore. And so the more the challenge is keeping up with the demands of everything you need to. And so, when you set like a goal out of we need to do something in 3 months, that's difficult, I think. I guess
It is.
everything
time
that's
constraints.
important takes more than 3 months, it seems like these days. So.
And when you're setting goals and then reevaluating your goals, whatever your poker goals might be, or just life goals in general, you often find there are hurdles. There are things that come up that you didn't anticipate that you have to deal with before you can get to the next thing. And I think that's always going to be the case. You guys, though, tell me, what would you say would be your greatest failure at Ante Up Magazine?
Oh boy, I used to have a really good answer for that. We've had some big ones. Well, again, I think probably the biggest one is what we already talked about is just making so many bad assumptions at the beginning. But we've tried a number of different products that haven't worked out. We've tried some that worked out great, like our Ante Up Poker Cruises was fantastic.
What's a failed product?
We tried to do some. One example I can come up with. We tried to move out of the poker market into the general gaming market, where more of the revenue is. And we were going to do some regional gaming guides. It was an idea I thought was a home run. A couple years ago, our ad sales guy thought it was a home run. We all did, and ultimately we just couldn't sell people on the concept. So we didn't we didn't lose a lot of money in it. We invested a lot of time that we lost in it. But then again, if you're not investing time in new ideas, you're never going to know whether they work out or not. So I never really consider them failures. I consider them educations. We learn from them, and then sometimes we'll come back from things that didn't work out, and 2 years later I'll come up with a new idea that I think might make it work, or it can be combined with another idea that didn't quite work out or didn't get off the ground, and make it work. So as long as you learn from the lessons of why it failed or why you think it might fail, it's never really a failure, I don't think. So
I love that mindset. It resonates with me a lot, and it can be applied to your poker game too. I always tell my audience, my guys, like, try something out. And if it works, then great. If you have a theory and you apply it and it works out, then great. You get to use it forever. If it doesn't work out and you get crushed, then you just prove the theory wrong and you move on, but you learn something. With every failure, you always learn. And the only way to not have failures is to not try anything that is risky or bold. So I very much suggest that people do fail. I mean, when you just look at the marketing aspect, most marketing fails. Your job is to find the marketing that succeeds and then double down on that. And you can't find that if you're not constantly experimenting, constantly testing, constantly iterating.
Yeah, I love when we're very honest with potential clients. Our focus is really on poker rooms and casinos, but we do have, over the years, we've had a number of people with poker products and training and classes and all kinds of stuff like that come to us. And early on, we took whatever dollar we could get, right?
Yeah.
But the poker market has changed over the 11 years that we've been in business. And so we've kind of watched that change and kind of understood it in some ways better than other folks. So then we get, now when we get that occasional inquiry from somebody that just starting out where we were 11 years ago, right? And I try to be as honest with them when they contact us, and I'm like, I don't know whether we're your best marketing partner, and I try to give them some tips on whether I think they should go for that. But some insist. Some say, hey, I want to try it out, and as long as their mentality is what you mentioned, it's like, hey, I want to try everything and see how it works, and I'll go back to it. I have no problem cashing that check, but I do have a problem taking money from folks that I know just we're not the right partner for them. If that makes sense.
It makes absolute sense. You're a good guy, and not knowing too much about the origins of Ante Up Magazine and stuff like that, I get the sense that you run the show with integrity, which is the most important thing in my opinion, especially in the poker space. There's a lot of snake oil salesmen. There's a lot of BS, a lot of those magazines, for instance, that no longer exist. A lot of lying to consumers and their people that are advertising in them. That it's very reassuring and makes me feel good hearing these things about Ante Up Magazine.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's really important to us to be that way. So, like I said, probably more lucrative not to be that way, but
not everything's about money. And yeah. I think honestly, it's more lucrative to act with integrity because it's sustainable.
Yeah, it's the long game, right? So
you're playing the long game. Yeah.
Here we are 11 years later, and we're still working at home, traveling the world, and we're not rich, but we're able to pay the bills and do something we like, and it's because we didn't go down that more aggressive route early on. So I'm sure there's folks out there that look at us and say, hey, we've under realized our potential, and that's a fair question to ask, and it might be true, but we feel good about where we are right now with how we've built our company and what our values are.
That's awesome, sir. That's awesome. Let's switch gears for a second. The name of this show is Chasing Poker Greatness, and you've had the opportunity to report, speak to, interview, talk to a lot of the stars of the game. What would you say? What does poker greatness mean to you specifically?
Poker greatness mean to me? Probably, I think the answer. I mean, people hate this when you talk about poker strategy. When people say it depends, but that's that's really the right answer, right? Because every poker player is different. Every poker player learns differently. Every poker player has skills that they can pull off that other poker players can't. You don't want to take somebody who's naturally a passive person and try to make them an aggressive poker player. That's not going to work, right? So I think it depends on poker greatness. We actually had an interesting discussion on our podcast a couple weeks ago that there's always been this kind of debate over like the Hendon mob and reporting sites like that only reporting on your winnings and not your buy-ins and your losses.
Yes.
And so it paints an incorrect picture of you as a poker player, right? So, just because you won $6 million doesn't mean that you're a profitable player. You could spend 10 million winning that 6 million, and somebody else that's listed on Hendon Mob with $25,000 in winnings could have done it with one buy-in, right? So part of that discussion was really one, why does it matter? But two, it depends, and part of it is some poker players love the limelight, they love being on TV, they love the endorsements. But there's quite a few out there that don't, actually, and that's what's interesting about our game. You tend to think that all poker players are salesmen or saleswomen.
But see,
there's quite a lot that just love to be in the shadows, cashing checks, right?
For sure. And it's an intangible thing, this thought of greatness. And I guess more so is, what does it mean to you personally? When you think of poker greatness, who's the first poker player that pops in your head?
That's going to be Doyle Brunson, I think. I just think he's done everything. I don't want to say everything right. No one's ever done anything right, but I like how he came. He was a poker player back before it was cool to be a poker player, back when it was super dangerous to be a poker player on top of that. He was able to get through all that, right? And then became a successful author, and has kept himself relevant all these years, and think about it. I mean, I know some people might question that because he's Doyle freaking Brunson, right? So his name's not going to go anywhere. But there were a lot of players when we first started getting involved with this game back in the moneymaker boom, like everybody else did, that we don't hear from anymore. We don't see. We don't know where they are. So to be able to stand that test of time, it's not just built on the fact that he won 2 world titles. It's that he comes across as a genuine guy, and kept himself relevant. He had an online site for a while. He's an author. He still made it on TV at times. But to stand the test of time in this game, I think that's where you get into greatness. I mean, we talk a lot about the Hall of Fame. You have to be 40 years old to get in it, and I'm not debating that at all. But I'm curious whether there's some folks that get in either are now or will get in the Hall of Fame in the future, right around that 40th birthday, that flame out spectacularly by 45 or 50. and years later, no one remembers who they are. So longevity. That's a long way of saying longevity.
A 500-word answer, meaning
Yes.
longevity.
I need an editor sometimes. Yes.
I mean, Doyle makes all the sense in the world to me. I love Doyle. Super System was the first book that I read that resonated with me way back in 2003. And like you said, Super System was not written in 2003. It was published way before that, way before the moneymaker boom. And to be on high stakes poker, to be on Poker After Dark, he's in his 80s now. I do think it's pretty much the epitome of poker greatness, right?
Yeah, and part of the point I didn't make is that the game has changed so much in 11 years I've been involved, well, 14 years I've been involved with it. It certainly has changed a lot in the 60 years or so that Doyle's been a part of it. And it's a game that we all know this. We need to adjust with it as it changes. You can't keep playing the same game you played when you learned. So, and now the game is so much more mathematical than I think it was in the past. So much of it is designed in people's minds where they know the right play at the right time because they can calculate that math quickly. That some of those players in the past, when it really was a play of the people, not the cards kind of game, never really adjusted to that. So, and I think it's important that you have the skills to adjust. And I love nothing more than that. Again, I'm an older guy now. I'm 47. I'm not old, but I feel old anytime I'm at the poker table, right? I mean, all of our world champions are in the 20s now, except for this last one. But I love when I'm watching one of my tournaments and there's a player at the table that's 60s, 70s, and is right in there mixing it up with those young kids and being successful at it, because that's somebody that I know has changed his game and been able to change his game. And probably that means he's going to be able to continue changing his game as long as he plays. And when you're talking about greatness, again, that goes back to it. There's just being able to. This poker is going to be completely different 5 years from now than it is now. Completely different. I don't know what it's going to be like, but I know it's going to be completely different. So.
It's probably going to be different depending on the arena that you play in. Whether if you're playing online, it'll be different in 6 months to a year.
Oh yeah,
I can guarantee.
Absolutely.
Because that's the arena that I battle in, and I've seen it over and over and over again. And what you mentioned about the older folks, Doyle, it's adaptability and it's humility. And I think that this is something that gets lost on a lot of poker players. To humble yourself enough to ask the simple question, am I doing enough? Has the game changed? What do I need to do to keep up? What work do I need to do? I see a lot of folks, I've seen it both ways. I've seen the old guys that stick to their guns, never adapt, never change, and they always flame out. The game passes them by and they don't even realize what happened, right? They believe, they're so convinced that they know the right way that they refuse to adapt, and they always get crushed. It always happens. And, you're 47, I'm 35. I look at those lessons because I've seen them firsthand, and I always ask myself those questions. I'm always asking myself, am I doing enough? What do I need to do to get better? How do I improve on a daily basis?
Yeah, you have to. If you don't, then you're just not going to survive. You have to continue to think about it. I mean, people say you have to continue to study and work at it, but study and work at it are different for everybody. But I think you have to have the mindset of every day trying to learn something new. And
what does your process look like for regularly improving your game?
Quite honestly, one of the funny things that Chris and I have always said for the last 11 years is because people will come up to us all the time and they're like, "Oh, wow." And people outside the poker world, and they ask us what we do for a living, and they're like, "Oh, wow, you must play a lot of poker." And so our long-standing joke has been that we quit our jobs to start a poker magazine to play less poker. But it's really the truth. We at the beginning of starting the company, we didn't have the time to play anymore, and now we've kind of our lives are different. We're in different places now. So, Chris has got hobbies outside of poker. I've got a lot of hobbies outside of poker. So I generally really only play when I'm at my events now. Still happy with my level of play at them. Still cash pretty regularly in tournaments. So really my kind of adjustment in how I continue to get better is just being involved in this poker world still. We talk to our strategy columnists. I read their columns when they come in the magazine. obviously preparing for our poker cast every week. We do a lot of reading, and then, when I'm on site at events, I talk to players a lot. They're interested in talking to me about Ante Up and what's going on. And I'm also interested in hearing their poker journeys and watching them play and hearing them tell me about it. So I've become a better player just because of being in this world.
And you touched on the podcast too. And in my conversation with Jackson Lasky, he mentioned that the most high impact thing he does is teaching other people, because it forces him to learn and grow as a player himself. So just doing your poker podcast, I would imagine you can't help but grow, especially when you have a deadline and you don't want to sound like a freaking idiot.
Well, yeah, one of the features of our podcast that's most popular is the end of it when we do what's called Hand of the Week, and one of our it's always a hand from one of our listeners, and most of our listeners are just like us, recreational players. I assume we've got some decent players that listen to us, but most of them are recreational weekend warrior kind of players. So and they send a hand into us and ask us to break it down. And anytime you're breaking down a hand and there are people listening to you talk about it, so it's not just Chris and I at the poker room or in our living rooms talking. We're talking to 12,000 people about how we would play this hand. You do have to slow down your thought process and think. And not that I worry about looking stupid, because I look stupid on the show all the time, but you don't set out to look stupid, right? So you want to try to think it through and make sure you make the understand everything that's happening in that hand and be able to communicate it to folks. So that's probably the biggest thing for me, is that once a week for 14 years now, we've taken a hand and really slowed it down. And that part of the podcast takes 20, sometimes 30 minutes to talk about a hand that was over in 2 minutes.
Sure.
So I think it is really amazing how much you learn from that. And then having somebody else to bounce it off of. If it's not just me talking into a mic and hoping people listen, it's me debating with Chris about how we would play, and our styles have always been different. And so it's always interesting on hands when we agree, because we worry if something went wrong. Because we're not supposed to agree, because we play completely differently. But having that challenge, when you say, hey, I would have raised the 4,000 there, and having somebody immediately say, no, that's horrible. Why would you raise there and reopen the betting, and then you have to defend your idea, or you have to acknowledge, hey, you know what? That's a good point. You were right and I was wrong on that. That's probably a better way of playing that hand. So
you need that challenge too, to challenge your thought process, to challenge your motivations, to challenge your why behind each and every action that you take. And if you can't verbally explain it, then it probably means that you got some work to do in that specific part of the decision tree.
I'm always envious because most of the time I'm traveling by myself. Chris doesn't travel very often. And of course, I got friends everywhere I go, but I am envious of the folks that really take their poker more serious than we do, that do travel and play a lot of places, and they do that with buddies. Because when you think about it at the table and you make a bad mistake, maybe you raised wrong there, or were too aggressive against a player that played back at you, or whatever it is, it's obviously important to stop and try to process that as quickly as possible and try to make any adjustments to your game. But to be able during that break to go find your buddy and say, hey, oh my God, I played this hand so horribly, and to go through and have them give feedback immediately and maybe give you that different way of looking at it. I think that's got to be a great benefit. So I'm definitely envious of those folks, and I know there are a lot of them out there.
It's massive value having somebody to bounce those ideas off of. I know that I wouldn't be the player that I am today had I not had my friend who played at a high level, teaching me and constantly questioning everything, like to the level that most people would be super annoyed, but I just loved it. I love being challenged on every decision that I made, because it forced me to think deeper and go deeper than I otherwise would have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in poker and life, talking to folks that disagree with you, one of two things is going to happen. Either your opinion is going to be reinforced, or you're going to see a different way of looking at it and may change your mind and make yourself a better person going forward. So there's never anything to be scared of having somebody question you or challenge you on those things, I think.
100%. And another little side benefit, I'll tell a quick story. because it's my show. I can do whatever I want. No. I'll tell a quick story here. I was playing in the Bay Area at the Matrix Casino, and I went there with my friend Tango. We both played the 10 and a quarter no limit cash game, and we were playing. And before we got into the game, there was a player milling about, and Tango said his name's Zach, and Zach is super aggressive. He's like, yeah, you'll love Zach. He's super, super crazy, super aggressive. I would get it in pre-flop for 5K against Zach with queens and wouldn't even think twice about it. And these things happen. It's just like, okay, like, we had the conversation. It's like, okay, go sit in the game. About 30 minutes in, I get queens. And Zach 3-bets me. I 4-bet him. He shoves. And I asked Zach how much he started with, and he tells me 5,000. And like Tango's at the table. I look at him and I just smile, and I call, and we run it out twice. And he asked me if I had a pair. I'm like, yes. He's like, okay. The first board just completely bricked off. He had nothing. The second board, the flop was like Jack 10 8, and he's like, I have a pair plus a straight draw. And then it bricked out, and I scooped it. And after the hand, I went and talked to Tango, and I'm like, wow, like that's pretty serendipitous that you say those exact words and then the exact situation happens.
Poker's crazy like that, isn't it?
It's very, very, very odd. What is up, you future star of poker, you? Coach Brad here, and I just wanted to take a moment to let you know about PKC Poker. If you're sitting there wondering, why is Coach Brad promoting this PKC Poker app thing? Allow me a moment to explain my why. Battling in cash games has been my livelihood for the past 15 years. It's how I survive and put food on the table, which makes it imperative that I either test out or seek qualified opinions on all of the poker platforms on the market. One juicy find can mean the difference between a meh year and an amazing family vacation in Hawaii kind of year. With that said, I've tried almost all the major poker apps on the market to date, and despite the hype about amazingly juicy games, I've come away from the experience unsatisfied. I was just never able to find amazing success against seemingly weak competition, and in one specific case, was getting outright destroyed by passive villains playing more than 50% of their hands. What the heck was going on? After many evenings sitting in the bathtub, wondering if I had lost it, I finally dug into the data and learned something that shouldn't have been too surprising to you. These dudes were colluding and super using their pants off. So I swore off those free money, decentralized devil apps and decided to go back to my more familiar streets of ignition. It was then that I was contacted by a good friend of mine who turned out to be the vice president of worldwide operations at PKC. Him and I had a long, in-depth conversation about security, the ecosystem, and the future direction of PKC, and he managed to convince me to give it a shot. That shot turned into an incredible 6 months with an hourly rate that's about 5 times what it would have been playing on any other US platform. As it turns out, I didn't forget how to play. I just needed a level playing field to return to my crushing ways. I have no doubt that you, my community, my audience, is going to play poker somewhere, and I want to be damn sure that you don't go through the pain and frustration I felt by messing around with any poker app besides PKC. This is why promoting PKC is a no-brainer. I love my community, and I want to put you in the best position to succeed at this game that we both love so much. So if you'd like to join me in the streets of PKC, simply head to enhanceyouredge.com/PKC and get your invite code to play. You must have an invite code, and you must be 21 years of age or older. One more time, that's enhanceyouredge.com/PKC. Best of luck, and now, on with the show. Let's go back to a little earlier in the conversation when we were talking about the Hall of Famers and guys flaming out.
Yeah.
In your experience, have you seen anything that separates those one-hit wonders with the pros who can sustain their results over time?
I would suspect, I can't say this for certain, but I would suspect it's a lot what we talked about earlier in the show about having that humility and an understanding that if you're a pro poker player, that you are on the roller coaster ride of your life. There's no way around that, right? At least if you're in the public realm. Again, like I said, there's a lot of folks that we don't know about that are probably banking a nice living playing ABC somewhere in a casino and be happy with it. But the ones in the public realm, you're on that roller coaster ride, and it's harder now because back right into that boom, there's a lot of money in the poker world, in terms of endorsements, products, all that kind of stuff that you could supplement your income with outside the table, and that's tough to find these days. Only a few can do that. So that means you actually have to win at the table, and we all know how difficult that is. No matter how good you are, there's so much variance in this game. So
especially in tournaments.
Oh, absolutely in tournaments, especially the extra cost involved in tournaments, travel and all that stuff, and
right,
wear and tear on your body. But so yeah, I think it's that ability to say, hey, I'm going to go in there and I am at the top of my game now, but I know I'm not always going to be at the top of my game. There's going to be a rough patch I'm going to hit at some point, and instead of getting angry about it, just accepting it before it happens, and then build yourself back up. So I'm always more impressed with the players that have hit that eventual flame out, which most do, and then have been able to work themselves back. I think the ones that don't work themselves well back, not all that impressive. I mean, here I am as somebody that's my biggest tournament cash is $2,200, right? So I'm not casting judgment on these people that have won 7-figure paychecks and then disappeared, but they just didn't have that fun. They didn't have that ability to have that longevity because they just probably weren't able to accept failure and accept that this is a game that you're going to fail quite a bit. Even in the middle of a tournament, even a tournament you win, think about how many bad plays you make, how many hands that you could have played better, and then how many times you got lucky, because you got to get lucky, right? So, even in that small microcosm of one tournament or one cash game session, if you're not able to come back from those failures, you're just not going to make it.
Mental toughness, always mental toughness in the poker arena, because you do fail. I've never myself played a perfect session where I didn't pick out multiple mistakes that I made in the session. It just doesn't happen. There's always room for improvement. So once again, we can sort of go back to humility, right?
Yeah, I won one of my NA events this summer. I won a horse title, which was exciting. That was my big $2,200 cash. But we talked about it on the show, and that was probably the most complete tournament I put together, where I just felt like everything was clicking for me. But even in that, there was one hand that I just felt I played absolutely horribly. And it's interesting when you get down to the end and you win and you're excited about it, but you still can't let go of that one hand. That I'm like, it wasn't a perfect day because that one hand, it was so spectacularly horrible, and I'm lucky that I was able to recover from that and continue on. So,
all right, I'll bite. What's the hand? Let's talk about your horrible hand.
No, I knew you were going to ask me that now, and I can't rember it.
You set it up. You're the one that set it up.
I know. I can't remember the details now, but I remember very clearly talking about on the show that day that I was like in the middle of this. I was riding high on it, and I mean, it's a horse tournament, so it wasn't like where I overbet because you can't limit the tournament. But probably, on those days when you feel very invincible at the table or things are going right, then you start to, this is what the difference between great players and good players is, that you start to loosen up a little bit and think you're invincible. And I think those great players always know that they are not invincible, that any hand could beat the David versus Goliath. So I'm pretty sure that the situation was a hand like that, where I was probably in one of the stud variations, because those are always the money suckers in horse tournaments, and just went to the end thinking that I had the nuts, and found out I had not even the bronze medal in the hand.
How did it feel after you lost that hand? How'd you recover?
Well, yeah. So I think the problem there is that I was playing so well so early in the tournament, feeling really good. You get that high where you're like, okay, I'm going to make it through this. And that one hand brings you back down to earth. I mean, I wasn't below average stack or anything because I had so many chips, but you're like, oh my gosh, I just spent 4 hours building up the stack, playing everything in my mind perfectly. And that one mistake, and I'm like, then you just kind of want to push that rewind button. And there's not a rewind button where you go back and I'm like, I just should not have gotten involved in that hand, or I should have got out of that hand as soon as I knew the situation was bad. And you can't, and that fact that you can't, that's the toughest thing I think for poker players is you can't go back. I'm like, I even play like I play a little $20 home game here in my town every once in a while. against players who are just beginner. It's just fun, just a chance to get out and talk and have a beer, right? And there are moments in that where I'm like, gosh, it was just so horrible. I wish I could have it back. And you look at the player across the table with all your chips, right? And he's stacking your chips. There's nothing worse in poker. There's nothing better in poker than stacking chips. Nothing worse in poker than watching somebody else stack your chips. And then you just want to reach over and grab them and take them back. I'm like, you don't deserve those. That was a bad play on my part, and I shouldn't have made it. And those chips should still be in my stack, but they're not. So, I think in that situation, I was able to very quickly realize how bad it was and double down and tighten up a little bit until I got back on my mojo. But
that's probably a good adjustment to make. It's easy to go down the slippery slope of trying to chase or get back what you just lost. And you always have to keep in mind that that's gone. Those chips are no longer your chips. Your situation is what it is now. So you have to adjust and just move forward. That's all you have control of.
Biggest mistake I think poker players make is that just giving up when they lose a big hand. I mean, how many times do you see a really big hand, the guy loses it, even if he played it well, right? Because that river comes or whatever. And then the next hand, they just throw all their chips in on some kind of like 8-6 offsuit or something, and then they're out. I mean, why would you do that? Why? What's the scenario where you're shoving with 8-6 in most cases? Almost never. And that was just an emotional thing. You thought your tournament was over, and then you made that statement true. You ended your tournament rather than buckling down and saying, "Hey, all right, I'm still in this thing." And that chip in the chair, that's not a saying. That's true. So
that is the definition of mental weakness, right? They're just punting.
Yeah.
They're punting and giving up. And I can say with complete honesty that I've always been a fighter. I've never wanted to give up. Like, I've always wanted to be in the arena battling and doing the best that I can, try to be optimistic moving forward. Regardless, if you're in the tournament, you have a chance. And if you're not in the tournament, you don't have a chance. So all you can really do is make great decisions, and the chips will fall where they may.
Yeah, well, my a lot of my listeners have nicknamed me the short stack ninja because I tend to have a short stack a lot because I'm not very good. But I like that scenario. I mean, obviously, I would prefer to have more chips. Everybody would, but I think poker for me is a lot more exciting when you're on that near death and having to dodge every hole like Indiana Jones, and if you miss one, you're out. And to be able to run that gauntlet and get back and build your stack up and get back in it, that's when poker's super fun to me.
I think that says a lot about who you are. You like a challenge. You rise to the challenge.
It's a much bigger challenge, I think, at that point, because every decision is magnified than when you start with 30,000 chips or something and the blinds are 25, 50 or something ridiculous like that. Where,
sure.
In most disciplined hands, the most you're going to lose at that time is 1,000, which is nothing, right? So, but when you have to make that decision about, is this the hand I shove with or not, or looking around the table and monitoring everybody's chip stacks and know where the blinds are and know who's at more peril than you are, and so, hey, I'm going to fold this ace now, even though I've got 5 big blinds. That's what makes it really fun for me, I think. And it's unfortunate because you shouldn't want to be in those scenarios ever.
Well, it's really fun to have a mountain of chips and just dominate too. I think both sides are pretty fun, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I just have more experience with the other side, so maybe someday
I think most people do. It's quite hard to run up a giant stack in a tournament. It doesn't happen super often. What's some poker advice that you hear that you completely disagree with?
Well, I think probably to some extent it's what we just talked about. There should be a better way to come up with this, but one of the things we do talk about on the show, and I don't know if it's advice that people give, but it's something that I try to reinforce with our listeners, is small blind play, because so many people will chuck that extra dollar in a 1-2 with absolute garbage hand or whatever it is in the tournament. And when they write us their hand of the week, they say, well, it's a discount. And I always tell folks, just because it's a discount doesn't make it a deal. When you get involved in the hand that you shouldn't have, and the absolute worst position, you end up making you put yourself in a situation where you're going to make a lot more mistakes. the position is everything argument is one that I absolutely agree with. And now you're involved in the worst position just because you thought it was cheap and you might hit that lottery ticket. And that's really what it is, right? When you've got 4 deuce in the small blind, you're hoping to hit a lottery ticket. And if you're hoping to hit a lottery ticket, you shouldn't be at the poker table ever, right? Because poker is not about lottery; it's about making the best decisions. You can go to the convenience store anytime you want and drop $100 on lottery tickets if that's what you want to do. So, but when I buy in for a 1-2 game with $100, I intend to walk out of there with more than I came into. So
I'll say that I half agree. I half agree with that.
okay,
The part that I disagree with, I am a big believer about getting a good price pre-flop. Pot odds are a real thing. Post-flop equity is a real thing. And you're absolutely right about being out of position throughout the whole hand. You're at a disadvantage. However, the part of your game that people ought to work on if they do want to play out of the small blind when getting a good price and getting good pot odds is their ability to make decisions in multi-way pots and just to discern bet sizes, to discern betting patterns, to discern physical tells, just an overall mastery of post-flop skills. If you can invest the time and energy into working on that aspect of your game, then I have no problem limping from the small blind with whatever, with the 40s off.
Let's be honest. If you're going to become a good poker player, you need to be able to play every position and not give up on hands. So I absolutely agree with where you're going with that. Part of my experience is most of our listeners and readers are recreational players that don't have those skills.
But Scott, it's so much fun to play hands. It's way more fun to play hands. Right?
It is, and it's so not fun to lose all your with 4 deuce. So I was just clarifying that that's kind of the frame of reference. A lot of my discussion with poker is that those are the folks that we're talking to.
Absolutely,
so now
that makes a lot of sense.
We try not to tell them not to do stuff so they don't learn, because you want to be able to learn. There's a lot of our listeners that don't want to just become the best player in their home game. They actually want to go on and get those big scores, right? So I don't want to discourage them from that, but I want them to be honest about what's going to happen before they get that skill set. So we do a lot of stuff on our show where we qualify, hey, this is a situation where you can get a little bit out of hand as long as you have a plan for what you're looking for and get away from it after that, and not rewrite a script after it to make it more exciting for you to stay in that hand, right?
Sure.
You're right.
Absolutely.
We want to play hands. That's the problem is all right, I'm going to got Jack 10. I'm in this for the straight. And then it ends up with the middle pair Jack. And then you're like, okay, well, I've got a chance of spiking that 10. So I'm saying, right? And that's bad poker at that point, because now you're looking for a reason to stay in when you shouldn't. So
I didn't drive an hour to the casino, get stuck in traffic to
exactly,
fold my 4 deuce off,
right?
to not play hands, right? I want to play.
So that's more of our lesson is that avoid those hands that put you to tests that are above your skill set at that point.
And in the context of your show,
you learn
that
a lot by
makes
watching
sense.
poker too, right? So I mean, that's one of the arguments I think people tell me is that, well, I need to play and make mistakes, which we talked about at the beginning of the show. You do need to make mistakes. You learn from mistakes, but you can also learn from other people's mistakes. When you're not in the hand, and this is a big thing I think a lot of players miss out on. I'm with them on that. Is not paying attention to the action when you're not in hand, when you folded, and watching that, because at that point, I think you'll learn a lot more of them, because when you're in the middle of a hand, you've got to think about what you're doing and how much you're going to bet, and it's your chips and your cards. When you're out of the hands, there's no risk for you anymore, right? So now you can actually sit there and think about, if you're in that spot, what you would do with whatever cards you have, and that's when you really start to learn more. And to your point, poker, you do need to know what your players do with their tendencies and all that kind of stuff, and that's where you pick it up more.
It's ultra valuable to pay attention when you're not in the hands. You can pick up physical tells. You can grab data points that you use in the future. And to allude to what you were saying about when you're involved in a hand, one factor that is massive in cash game poker especially is there's pressure. And that pressure can cloud your judgment. Your emotions can bubble to the surface and override your logical brain. And when you're in an observation mode, you don't have that pressure anymore. That pressure is lifted. So you have a lot more clarity when accumulating data that will be valuable later on. And I guarantee 100% it will be valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I mentioned not too long ago on a show, we had a listener that lost a huge pot because he didn't see the flush hit there on the river. It's happened to us all 100 times, right? And one of the tips I gave him, mostly because my cash game experience is mostly with Omaha High-Low, which is my favorite game, is that in that game you have to always know what the nuts are because the nuts are almost always out there. So even when I'm not in the hand, I'm watching the board, and every time the flop comes down, I tell myself what the nuts are, not high is and the nut low is. And I continue to do that through the hand, so that way you're less likely to miss those things when they hit, and more in tune to the possibility that they're out there. So that helps you figure out why some people in the hand. Now that works well for Omaha. It doesn't translate as well to Hold'em, but it does, I think.
Yeah.
And I got a good positive reinforcement from that listener that was a pretty good tip. So, but that's something that you learn. That's a skill you learn way more when you don't have cards in your hand. So.
Sure. Very nice. You have to, can we just get the casinos to buy 4-color decks? I mean, like, you know,
when the online sites started doing those, and at first you see it, and it's weird because it's different. It's not, there's no reason it's weird. It's just different. And then you start playing with it, and you're like, I really, really, really like this. And then you realize I shouldn't be playing with this because as soon as I go into a casino, you're right, it's going to be back to black and red. So,
oh no, I'm never playing without 4-color deck online. I've stuck my money in thinking I had the nut flush when I had a spade and a club in my hand and felt like an idiot, and that will never happen to me again. And on the history of poker, not sure if you know this, but in the beginning, all decks were 4 colors.
Oh, really? No, I did not know that.
But it was too expensive to print them back in the day in 4 colors.
Yeah.
So they went with red and black. And somehow, let's get these casinos to put the 4-color decks back. Like, you don't miss flushes when it's 4 colors, right? It's just so much easier to me. And I will never talk them into it because everybody associates, diamonds and hearts with red. But I wish we could.
Well, you've got 2 problems. We talk about this on our show, too. I mean, I imagine there's some gaming regulations problems with that. But even if not, then you deal with players. And
you mean poker players complain about arbitrary, random things?
I know. It's so hard to imagine that, right? It never happens. But yeah, that's a real problem anytime you're trying to change anything in a poker room.
What's the argument there? Fuck blue. I don't like blue. Get out of here, blue.
Like things that the way they always have been. Now I go to the Poker TDA Summit every year. I mean, it's every other year. I've been to the last probably 5 of them now, and they're all the same in the sense that the argument isn't what's right or wrong. The argument tends to be how their players are going to react to it because they've always done it this way. And trying to convince them that, this is better. The big blind ante is a huge example of that, right? There's absolutely no reason that we should never not use the big blind ante now. It's just a beautiful invention. But, the only reason players can really give you an argument against it is, well, that's not the way it used to be. I'm used to it this way.
Yeah, and that's a bad argument.
But that being said, if I'm a poker operator and my bosses are watching how much revenue I bring in, and I'm doing something that players are uncomfortable with, and they're going somewhere else, that's a problem. So I'd imagine that would be the same thing with the 4-color deck, and the same thing that's going to be with card destiny, which I think is going to be the next big issue that players are going to have to get past. Because
I want to ask you, what was that card destiny?
Yeah.
I have no idea what that is. I'll ask you about it in a second, but I want to touch on one thing before it leaves my brain never to return. In the online sense, like as far as online marketing, online entrepreneurship, instead of having these conventions where everybody talks about how the players will react, why not just set one table up with a 4-color deck and test it? Set up one weekly tournament with the big blind ante, test it with your guys, get some exit interviews, ask some questions to your audience, and see how they like it. If they hate it, then okay, you say the idea is not valid and we move on. If they love it and that reaction is completely different than what people anticipate the reaction, because
like you said before, one of your failures at Ante Up was thinking that moving into the gaming arena was going to be a great move and your audience would love it. But in the end, your audience didn't accept it. They didn't love it, right?
Yep.
So at the end of the day, just test these things. Run some isolated tests and then record the results. And if they're awful, okay, scrap it. But if they're great, then move forward. I think that would be a lot better than, a bunch of people hypothetically discussing how people might feel.
Right. And I think the best poker rooms do that. I think Aria is a real good experimenter with things and willing to put that stuff out there and try it on small trials and refine it. Matt Savage does that with a lot of the tournaments he runs as well, too. He does it really well. And there's also something to be said about being strong and standing up to the players that complain about it and saying, hey, I understand why you're upset about it, but this is better. So hear me out. Give us some time, and this is going to be the future. And that really was the struggle with Big Blind Annie at the beginning, I think. I don't think players immediately jumped on that bandwagon until they actually saw them play a couple times and really understood how much better it was. And, if you're an operator and you try it for one tournament and everybody complains and you say, all right, I'm done, I tried it.
And
you didn't really try it, right?
Well, it's experiential learning, too. A lot of people don't know how they react until they experience something in a live setting. So, and let's go back to Poker Destiny. What the heck is that? It sounds like
the Card Destiny,
like
a
video game. Card Destiny.
Yeah, this has been a long-standing thing on our show too, because Chris and I disagree about that. Chris has always been a proponent of Card Destiny, and I've always thought it's kind of hogwash. So the concept really is that when a card is dealt to the wrong spot at the table, people insist that card was meant for them, or that turn card was meant to be the turn card, or the river card was meant to be the river card. The alternate is that no, there's complete randomness to it. That card is not seen by anybody. No one knows what it is. So why does it matter whether it's this card or the card underneath that's the one that's going to be the one you play on the turn, or the one that's going to be in your hand? And it was discussed at the TDA Summit pretty well this year that we're getting to the card, getting away from Card Destiny and getting more into your do a random card. So it's going to make a lot of floor calls a little easier, I think.
What is the difference? I'm not understanding. It sounds philosophical. How is it?
It's completely philosophical.
And
absolutely
actionable. How do tournament directors use this?
One would be one of the new rules this year was in stud. So on 7th Street, your card is supposed to be dealt face down, right? So in the past, if it was dealt face up, it had to stay face up, and you could declare yourself all in. Well, they changed it now where that card gets taken back and shuffled back into the deck, and then you're giving a new 7th Street card face down. So that way your hand is still fair in the fact that you're playing it the way you should, which is face down, which is the whole essence of stud, right? That you have 3 cards down and 4 cards up, so no one really knows what you have, right? So that would be an example. So let's say the dealer throws me my 7th Street card and it's the Jack of Clubs, but he throws it face up instead of face down, right? That's the card I was destined to get. In the old world, I had to keep that card, and then my how I played the hand was limited because that card is exposed. So when you talk about random card instead, now you're taking that Jack of Clubs, putting it back in the stub, shuffling it up, and sending you another card. So you may get that Jack of Clubs. It may come back to you, and that actually happened in a tournament a couple months ago I was in, which was fantastic. But if not, you're getting a random card, and people don't know what it is now because it's face down. So what's the better scenario in that? And that's the same. It's eventually going to get to Hold'em. They didn't want to make a commitment on that this year, but I think we're going to get there on turn and rivers that are premature. Just shuffle it up, get a new random card.
This doesn't happen in tournaments. This has always happened in cash games. This is bizarre to me.
Well, it's the remedy. The remedy is going to change.
By the way, my only thoughts on Card Destiny is I hate it. But I hate it.
But players stick with that. Players are really they really believe that card was due them, and even though no one knows what it is, and no one will ever know what that card is supposed to be, and then you get a different card, they somehow feel that the magic worlds of the world have decided that that's the card they're supposed to have, and hell or high water, that's the card they need to have.
Well, when your argument
ridiculous.
contains the word magic, I think that's when I start mentally checking out.
Exactly.
It's all randomness. It's unknown information. I'm actually shocked that in a cash game, if they prematurely deal the turn, standard practice is to shuffle, complete the action, and then deal a new turn. The turn doesn't just stay, or the river doesn't just stay.
Right, but in those cases, they'll bring the river card out as a turn, and then they'll shuffle before the river, so that way they keep. Again, that's one of the destined cards, right? So it was destined for a different spot, but now it was destined for the board, and people want it on the board one way or the other. And,
gotcha. Well, I'm on your side. I hate just no. I believe in randomness.
Do a random card. You're doing two random cards in your hole. That's the only thing you're doing. So.
Right, exactly. So if you were to gift the Chasing Poker Greatness audience one book, what would that book be and why?
Oh, one book. Let's see. I gotta get the title right because I confused it. But Winning Omaha A Poker from Mark Tenner and Lou Krieger has always been my favorite book for Omaha A players. Obviously, not Omaha A player. You're probably not going to enjoy it very much. But that and Winning Little Limit Hold'em from Lee Jones, I learned a lot from that when I was early on. Again, I prefer to play limit. I know I'm 47, and that makes me sound like I'm 77, right? But
you're a fossil. Limit poker.
But you do learn a lot of those, even that can translate to no limit. Obviously, we talked about Super System, and those books are fantastic. The Full Tilt Strategy Guide that I don't even know if you can get anymore outside of used on eBay. I thought I learned a lot from that. So there were a lot of books back in the day I thought that were really good. But I'm really a bigger fan of the fundamental books rather than I'm of advanced strategy, because I think that's most players. Again, I talk to a recreational audience, right? So most players in a recreational audience are going to learn a lot more from fundamental books than they are from some pro telling them how he or she is won millions. Because if you don't have that style of play that pro does, then that those tips are probably not going to work for you. But a fundamental book is going to work for everybody.
And I've said it a million times, but I'll say it 1,000,001. If you want to improve your poker game, work on the fundamentals, work on the decisions that you encounter multiple times every single session. Do not spend 30 minutes breaking down a hand that happens once every 2 lifetimes.
Right,
it's not efficient. It doesn't do anything to improve your game. Work on decisions that are early in the decision tree that happen over and over and over again. Those are the things you want to master, especially being a recreational player. They're going to, those are the things that are going to improve your game dramatically over a short period of time, versus worrying about, bet 3-betting the river in a 3-bet pot.
One of the things that we always say on our hand of the weeks are that we try not to be result oriented. We're not looking at how we could have won that hand. We're looking at how we could have played that hand better. But we've spent a fair amount of time reminding folks this particular hand is never going to happen again. You're not going to have the same 7 guys at the table. You're not going to have the same cards on your hand. You're not going to have the same chip stacks. So this hand will never happen again. So when you're analyzing that hand, what you're really looking for is strategies to play scenarios like that better in the future. So,
and even if you were in a same situation where everybody had the same chip stacks, everybody had the same cards, same exact situation, the player to your left may not have just lost a monster pot, and now he's mentally in a different place than he otherwise would be. Maybe he didn't sleep well at night. There are a million emotional factors that can also change even in identical situations. Mike Caro calls it the law of loose wiring, where players in identical situations often don't know what they're going to do until right before they do it. It's somewhat of an arbitrary decision.
Well, even if you're playing with the same group of guys, and I go to a lot of casinos where that 10 a.m. crew, right, is the same 8 guys every day, 9 guys. Right?
Coffee and newspaper guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So even if it's the same guys, you're right. There are things that are going on in their lives, and they may not be talking about at the table, that makes them different that day. So I may have Brad locked down. I may have you. I know all your moves and all that. but the night before something bad happened or something great happened, and next day you're feeling different, and then you play different. So you can't always bank on that. I mean, we've had a couple hands that I think are great where people say, I've seen this guy make this move 10 times. And so I knew he didn't have it. So I called him with jack high or something, and he turns over 2 pair. And yeah, so you'll never truly know what somebody has at that point.
Stay alert, pay attention. When you're not involved in hands, collect the data and use the data. Don't get lazy. Get off your stupid phone. Stop watching ESPN. Pay attention to the task at hand.
Absolutely.
What's a project you're working on that's near and dear to your heart?
It's kind of a weird, but we just launched our new website, which needed to be terribly updated for years. So we're excited that that's finally complete. It took us longer than we wanted to. So now we launched it about a month ago, actually.
Congrats. Nice.
So thank you. So we're still making some adjustments to it. Still, gauging new analytics and deciding where to take it from there. But from there, though, we're going to start working more on regional, highlighting our regional coverage, which has always been our calling card. We're the one true news poker magazine out there, and we do segment it based on regions. So if you only play in the South, then that may be the only region you care about seeing stuff in. So we're going to be working on some new regional guys that will be digital. Obviously
So you have a different magazine for how many editions do you have?
Yeah, right now we have the one print magazine that we always have. So what we're looking to do now is in a digital version, not a print version, but a digital version, doing 5 additional ones. It'll have a lot of the same content. It's not going to be new content. It's just going to be packaged differently.
Repurposed.
To focus to folks that, maybe not want to have to sift through 60 pages. They only want to sift through 16. So, and that's something our advertisers have asked us for as well, too. So we'll see whether it works out. The regional gaming guys were something our advertisers asked us for and decided that they didn't like it. So we'll see. But definitely, like everybody else, we've been cognizant over the last couple of years that of the need to transition away from print to more digital and online stuff, and that's what we've been working on. So in lots of different ways. So, but that's the biggest way so far.
Awesome. Best of luck. Thank
you. Appreciate
it. It's a big challenge, and I think you guys will do it. Just coming out of this conversation, I think that y'all will make the transition very well and move forward.
Thank you. Certainly hope so.
At the end of the day, what would you like your legacy in poker to be? How would you like your community to remember you?
I think what we talk a lot about is the fact that when we started our magazine, again, it was focused on Florida poker players and Florida poker rooms. And we realized probably within a year that the niche wasn't Florida. The niche was recreational players and everyday players, which, I don't know what the estimates really are, but we've always estimated 90-95% of the poker players, right? So it's the vast majority, we could say, of poker players, right? And the fact that we gave them a magazine that appealed to them and not pros, that we gave them a podcast that appealed to them and not pros, that we gave them poker cruises that appealed to them and not pros, a poker tour that appealed to them and not pros. I think all those things. We try not to be arrogant in what we do. We're just happy that people keep listening to our show and reading our magazine. But I don't think you're going to find too many people that have done more for recreational poker in these last 11 years than Chris and I have and Ante Up. So I certainly hope that would be our legacy, is that letting those players feel special.
I love that. I love that. That's awesome. And you're serving your audience and you're serving your community by giving them those spaces that are, somewhat free of pros, because this allows them to succeed. It allows them to thrive, increases their ROI when they go on one of your cruises. And I think that they're appreciative of that.
Appreciate it.
Final question. Where can the Chasing Poker Greatness audience find you on the interwebs?
That would be anteupmagazine.com. And again, like I said, it's a brand new website. So when you get there, let us know what you think of it, what we could do a little bit better. We certainly have more plans to add to it, but we wanted to really kind of reimagine what information we want to present to you on the line. We had a lot of content over 11 years, and so we pared back some of it on there and highlighted some other ones. So again, we've always been a company that's been very eager for feedback, and we've made a lot of changes in all of our products based on that feedback. So yeah, definitely check out anteupmagazine.com and let us know what more we could do for the poker community. We'll be happy to.
Do you hear that, Mr. Listener? That's your call to action. Head to anteupmagazine.com. Give them some feedback so that they know what they're doing. Feedback is so important all the way around that, I would be grateful. Scott would be grateful if you head to their website, give them some feedback. And Scott, loved this conversation. Thank you so very much for taking the time out of your life to chat with me.
Oh, thank you very much for having us. I really do appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, sir. And until next time.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Chasing Poker Greatness. If you haven't yet subscribed to the show, please take a moment to do so on Apple Podcasts or wherever your favorite place to listen to podcasts may be. And once again, I also wanted to let you know about PKC Poker. If you're on the lookout for a new platform where the games are safe and secure and the action is amazing, head to enhanceedge.com/PKC to get your code and jump into the games. You must have a code to play as well as be 21 years of age or older. One final time, that's enhanceedge.com/PKC. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time on Chasing Poker Greatness.